It was getting dark when 17-year-old Tyler finished basketball practice at Riverside High School. The gym lights had been turned off and most of his teammates had already gone home. Tyler wiped the sweat from his forehead with his jersey and packed his basketball shoes into his worn sports bag. He had stayed late to work on his free throws, something his coach had been pushing him to improve. Tyler pulled his headphones over his ears and started the 20-minute walk home through Millbrook Heights, the quiet suburban neighborhood where his family had moved just 3 months ago. His father had gotten a promotion at work and they finally could afford to live in a nicer area with better schools. Tyler was still getting used to the tree-lined streets and big houses that were so different from their old apartment complex downtown. As he walked, Tyler thought about the math test he had tomorrow. He was maintaining a 3.8 GPA and hoped to get a scholarship to college. His parents had always pushed him to focus on his studies, knowing that education was his ticket to a better future. The basketball was just for fun, though he was pretty good at it. Coach Peterson had even mentioned that scouts from some colleges might come watch their games this season. The streetlights were just coming on as Tyler turned onto Maple Street. This was his favorite part of the walk home because the houses here had beautiful front yards with perfectly cut grass and flower gardens. Some houses still had their Christmas lights up from the holidays, creating a warm glow in the evening darkness. Tyler often wondered what it would be like to grow up in a neighborhood like this, where kids could ride their bikes safely, and families had barbecues in their backyards. About 5 blocks from his house, Tyler noticed a police car driving slowly behind him. At first, he didn't think much of it. Police cars were common in this area, and his parents had told him that was one of the reasons the neighborhood was so safe. But as he continued walking, the car stayed behind him, matching his pace. Tyler felt a small knot form in his stomach, but he told himself he was just being paranoid. Officer Derek Martinez sat in his patrol car, watching the teenager walk ahead of him. Martinez had been a police officer for 5 years, and he prided himself on knowing when something didn't look right. To him, this kid walking through Millbrook Heights at night seemed out of place. The boy was tall and athletic, wearing a basketball jersey and carrying a sports bag. Martinez had seen plenty of break-ins in nice neighborhoods, and in his experience, they were often committed by young people who didn't belong there. Martinez had grown up in a working-class family and had worked hard to become a police officer. He believed strongly in law and order and protecting good communities from troublemakers. Over the years, he had developed what he called a sixth sense for spotting potential criminals. Something about this teenager walking alone through the expensive neighborhood set off his internal alarm bells. The officer slowed his car even more, studying the boy's movements. The kid was walking with purpose, but that could be an act. Criminals often tried to blend in by acting casual. Martinez noticed the boy's clothes looked a bit worn, and his basketball shoes had seen better days. These observations reinforced his suspicion that the teenager didn't live in this area. Tyler could feel his heart beating faster as he realized the police car was definitely following him. He tried to stay calm and keep walking normally, but his hands were getting sweaty. He thought about the conversations his parents had with him about what to do if he ever had an encounter with police. Be respectful, keep your hands visible, don't make any sudden movements, and call us immediately if anything happens, his mother had said. The teenager tried to focus on getting home. Just 4 more blocks and he would be at his front door. His parents were probably finishing dinner and wondering where he was. His little sister Emma was probably doing her homework at the kitchen table, and his mom would have saved him a plate of food. The thought of home made him feel a little better, but the police car was still there, creeping along behind him. Martinez picked up his radio and called in to dispatch. Unit 47 here. I'm following a suspicious person walking through the 1200 block of Maple Street. Young male, appears to be in his teens, carrying a sports bag. Doesn't appear to belong in the area. The dispatcher acknowledged his call and asked if he needed backup. Martinez said he would handle it for now, but to keep someone available just in case. As Tyler approached the corner of Maple and Oak Street, he made the mistake of looking back over his shoulder. When he saw the police officer looking directly at him, their eyes met for a brief moment. Tyler quickly looked away and kept walking, but that glance back had sealed his fate. To Officer Martinez, the boy looking back was a clear sign of guilt. Innocent people didn't check to see if police were watching them. The officer decided it was time to make contact. He had a job to do, and that job was protecting the good people of Millbrook Heights from potential threats. In his mind, everything about this situation screamed trouble. A young person who didn't belong in the neighborhood, walking around after dark, acting nervous when he spotted the police car. Martinez had seen this scenario play out many times before, and it usually ended with an arrest. Tyler heard the police car's engine get louder as it accelerated past him and then pulled over to the curb about 50 feet ahead. The red and blue lights came on, painting the quiet street in flashing colors. Tyler's mouth went dry as he realized the officer was getting out of the car. This was really happening. The teenager stopped walking and tried to remember everything his parents had taught him. Stay calm, be respectful, keep your hands where they can be seen. He pulled his headphones off and let them hang around his neck. His basketball bounced once against his leg as he shifted his sports bag to his other shoulder. Officer Martinez stepped out of his patrol car and adjusted his uniform. He was a stocky man in his early 30s with short brown hair and a mustache. His hand rested casually on his service belt as he began walking toward Tyler. The officer had handled hundreds of these types of encounters, and they usually went the same way. Most people got nervous when confronted by police, especially if they were up to no good. Tyler stood still on the sidewalk, his heart pounding so loud he was sure the officer could hear it. The peaceful neighborhood street had suddenly become the center of his universe. Porch lights were coming on in nearby houses, and Tyler wondered if anyone was watching what was about to happen. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change both of their lives forever. Officer Martinez approached with the confidence of someone who believed he was doing his job, while Tyler waited with the anxiety of someone who knew he had done nothing wrong, but wasn't sure that would matter. Officer Martinez walked slowly toward Tyler, his boots making deliberate sounds on the concrete sidewalk. The flashing red and blue lights from his patrol car created an eerie atmosphere on the otherwise peaceful street. Tyler stood perfectly still, trying to control his breathing as the officer approached. Every instinct told him to run, but he knew that would only make things worse. "Good evening," Officer Martinez said in a tone that wasn't friendly. "Can I ask what you're doing walking around this neighborhood?" His eyes scanned Tyler from head to toe, taking in every detail of his appearance. The worn basketball shoes, the slightly faded jersey, the old sports bag that looked like it had seen better days. Tyler cleared his throat nervously. "Good evening, officer. I'm just walking home from basketball practice at school." His voice came out steadier than he felt, which was a relief. He had practiced this conversation in his head many times, thanks to his parents' warnings about potential police encounters. "Basketball practice, huh?" Martinez stepped closer, invading Tyler's personal space. "What school would that be?" The officer's tone suggested he didn't believe the answer before he even heard it. "Riverside High School, sir. I stayed late to work on my free throws." Tyler gestured toward his sports bag. "I've got my practice clothes and shoes in here if you need to see them." Martinez ignored the offer and continued his interrogation. "So you're telling me you live in this neighborhood?" "This is a pretty expensive area for a high school student to be living in." The officer's skepticism was obvious, and Tyler felt his cheeks getting warm with embarrassment and frustration. "Yes, sir. My family moved here about 3 months ago. We live on Cedar Street, just 4 blocks from here." Tyler pointed in the direction of his house, hoping the officer would let him continue on his way. "My parents are probably wondering where I am right now." "Cedar Street?" Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Those are some pretty nice houses over there. What does your father do for work that allows him to afford a house in this neighborhood?" The question felt like an accusation, and Tyler realized the officer was implying his family didn't belong here either. Tyler hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should reveal his father's job. His dad had always taught him to be proud of his accomplishments, so he decided to answer honestly. "My father works for the government. He got promoted recently, which is why we were able to move here." "Government work, huh?" Martinez's expression didn't change, but something in his tone became even more suspicious. "That's pretty vague. What kind of government work? And what about your mother?" The teenager was starting to feel uncomfortable with all the personal questions. "My mom is a nurse at City General Hospital." "Look, officer, I really haven't done anything wrong. I was just walking home from school. Can I please call my parents to let them know where I am?" Officer Martinez didn't like the direction this conversation was taking. In his experience, guilty people always tried to redirect the conversation or bring other people into the situation. The kid's story was too convenient, too rehearsed. A government worker, father, and a nurse mother living in an expensive neighborhood? It sounded like something a teenager would make up on the spot. "I'll decide when you can make phone calls," Martinez said firmly. "Right now I need you to empty that bag so I can see what's inside. We've had some break-ins in this area recently, and young people carrying bags through the neighborhood at night fit the profile of our suspects." Tyler felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. "Officer, I'm not a suspect in any break-ins. This is just my basketball equipment. I practice at this time every Tuesday and Thursday, and I always walk home this way. Some of the neighbors have probably seen me before." "Empty the bag," Martinez repeated, his hand moving to rest on his service belt. "And I want to see some identification while you're at it." With shaking hands, Tyler unzipped his sports bag and began pulling out its contents. First came his basketball shoes, still damp with sweat from practice. Then his school clothes, neatly folded the way his mother had taught him. A water bottle, a towel, and his math textbook came next. Finally, he pulled out his wallet and handed over his student ID card. Martinez examined the ID card carefully, comparing the photo to Tyler's face. The card clearly showed Tyler's name, his student status at Riverside High School, and even had the current school year printed on it. It was legitimate documentation that supported everything the teenager had told him. But instead of being satisfied, Officer Martinez became more irritated. He didn't like being wrong, and he especially didn't like being wrong in front of potential witnesses. Several porch lights had come on along the street, and he could see curtains moving in windows as neighbors tried to get a better look at what was happening. "This could be fake," Martinez said, holding up the student ID. "Kids these days can make fake IDs that look pretty convincing. I'm going to need to verify this information." He pulled out his radio and called dispatch again. "Unit 47 requesting a background check on a Tyler Johnson, claims to be a student at Riverside High." Tyler couldn't believe what was happening. His legitimate ID was being treated as potentially fake evidence. "Officer, you can call the school if you want. Coach Peterson can verify that I was at practice tonight. Or you can call my parents. Their number is in my phone." "I told you I'll decide when phone calls get made," Martinez snapped. "Right now you're acting pretty nervous for someone who claims to be innocent. In my experience, people who have nothing to hide don't get this worked up during a simple police interaction." The irony of the statement hit Tyler hard. How was he supposed to not be nervous when a police officer was treating him like a criminal for walking home from school? His hands were shaking, his voice was unsteady, and his heart was racing. But these were normal reactions to being stopped and questioned by police, not signs of guilt. "I'm nervous because I've never been stopped by police before," Tyler said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm just a high school student walking home. I don't understand why this is happening." Martinez's radio crackled to life. The dispatcher came back with information about Tyler Johnson. "Unit 47, we show a Tyler Johnson registered as a junior at Riverside High School. Address listed as 1847 Cedar Street. No criminal record. No outstanding warrants." The information confirmed everything Tyler had told him, but Officer Martinez wasn't ready to back down. He had committed to this encounter, and backing down now would make him look foolish. There had to be more to this story. Maybe the kid was involved in something that wasn't showing up in the basic background check. "So your story checks out," Martinez said, handing the ID back to Tyler. "But that doesn't mean you're not up to something tonight. I want you to explain exactly where you've been for the last hour, what route you took to get here, and why you chose to walk through this particular neighborhood instead of taking a more direct route home." Tyler felt his frustration building. The officer was asking him to account for every minute of his evening like he was already a convicted criminal. "I told you I was at basketball practice until about 30 minutes ago. I always walk home this way because it's well lit and safe. Maple Street connects directly to Cedar Street where I live. And you expect me to believe that in the 3 months you've lived here, nobody has ever questioned your presence in this neighborhood before tonight?" Martinez's tone suggested this was impossible. "No, sir, nobody has ever stopped me before. Most of the neighbors are friendly. Mrs. Patterson on Oak Street always waves when she sees me walking by. The Hendersons have a dog that always barks at me from their front yard." Tyler was grasping at any details that might prove he belonged in the neighborhood. Officer Martinez realized he was losing control of the situation. The kid's story was holding up. Dispatch had confirmed his identity, and neighbors were definitely watching the interaction. But something still felt wrong to him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler was hiding something. The officer decided to push harder to see if he could get the teenager to slip up and reveal his true intentions for being in the neighborhood that night. The tension on Maple Street was becoming impossible to ignore. More porch lights had flickered on, and Tyler could see shadows moving behind curtained windows as neighbors tried to figure out what was happening outside their homes. The flashing police lights created an urgent atmosphere that made the routine traffic stop feel like something much more serious. Officer Martinez was growing increasingly frustrated with Tyler's calm responses and legitimate documentation. In his 5 years on the force, he had developed a reputation for being thorough, and he wasn't about to let this encounter end without proving his instincts were correct. Something about this situation still felt wrong to him, even though all the evidence supported Tyler's story. "I want you to put your hands on the hood of my patrol car," Martinez ordered suddenly, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. "I'm going to conduct a search to make sure you're not carrying anything illegal." Tyler's eyes widened in shock. "Officer, I thought you said this was just a routine questioning. I've shown you my ID, you've verified my identity, and I've explained why I'm here. Why do you need to search me?" "Because I'm the police officer here and I decide what's routine and what isn't," Martinez shot back. "The fact that you're questioning my authority tells me you might have something to hide. Now put your hands on the car like I told you." Tyler's mind raced as he tried to remember what his parents had taught him about police encounters. They had told him to comply with officer requests to avoid escalating the situation, but they had also taught him about his constitutional rights. He knew he had the right to ask if he was under arrest and the right to know why he was being searched. "Am I under arrest, officer?" Tyler asked, his voice shaking slightly. "And if you're going to search me, can you please tell me what crime you suspect me of committing?" Martinez felt his blood pressure rising. The kid was asking legal questions that suggested someone had coached him on how to interact with police. In the officer's experience, innocent people didn't know about their rights during police encounters. They just cooperated and went on their way. This teenager's knowledge of proper police procedure only reinforced Martinez's suspicion that Tyler was involved in criminal activity. "You're not under arrest yet," Martinez said, emphasizing the word yet in a threatening manner. "But you're acting suspicious and I have the right to search you for my own safety. This is called a Terry stop and it's completely legal. Now stop asking questions and do what I tell you to do." Tyler felt trapped between his desire to comply and his growing sense that this encounter was spiraling out of control for no good reason. He looked around the street and noticed that some neighbors were now standing on their front porches, openly watching the interaction. A few people appeared to be recording with their phones, which gave Tyler a small sense of relief that there would be witnesses to whatever happened next. "Officer, I want to comply with your requests, but I also want to call my parents to let them know what's happening," Tyler said carefully. "They're expecting me home and they're going to be worried if I don't show up soon. The only thing you need to worry about right now is following my instructions," Martinez snapped. He stepped closer to Tyler, invading his personal space even more aggressively than before. "Put your hands on the hood of the car, spread your legs, and don't move until I tell you to." Tyler's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Every instinct told him this was wrong, but he also knew that refusing could lead to much worse consequences. He slowly approached the patrol car and placed his hands on the warm metal hood, trying to steady his breathing as Officer Martinez moved behind him. "This is completely unnecessary," Tyler said quietly, more to himself than to the officer. "I haven't done anything wrong." Martinez heard the comment and interpreted it as continued resistance to his authority. "That's exactly what every criminal says when they get caught," he said as he began patting down Tyler's pockets and checking his waistband for weapons or contraband. "If you were really innocent, you wouldn't be complaining about a routine safety check." The search revealed nothing more threatening than Tyler's house keys, his phone, and a few dollars in cash. Officer Martinez found no weapons, no drugs, no stolen property, and no evidence of any criminal activity whatsoever. The teenager was exactly what he claimed to be, a high school student walking home from basketball practice. But instead of ending the encounter and allowing Tyler to go home, Martinez felt even more determined to justify his actions. He had now committed significant time and resources to this stop. Neighbors were watching, and backing down would suggest he had made a mistake. The officer's pride wouldn't allow him to admit that his suspicions had been wrong from the beginning. "Where exactly is your house?" Martinez demanded, stepping back from Tyler but not giving him permission to move away from the car. "I want the exact address, and I want to know who else lives there with you." Tyler remained bent over the hood of the patrol car, his hand still pressed against the metal surface. 1847 Cedar Street. I live there with my parents and my younger sister. Officer, can I please stand up now? And can I call my parents? They're going to be really worried. You'll stand up when I tell you to stand up, Martinez said. And I want to see proof that you actually live at that address. Having an address in the system doesn't mean you actually live there. Maybe you just used that address when you applied for your fake student ID. Tyler couldn't believe what he was hearing. His legitimate student ID was being dismissed as potentially fake. His address was being questioned despite being confirmed by dispatch, and he was being treated like a criminal for walking home from school. The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if it weren't so frightening. "My house key is in my pocket," Tyler said, his voice muffled by his position against the car. "You just searched me and felt it. I can show you that it opens the front door of 1847 Cedar Street, if that would prove I live there." Martinez considered this offer but realized it would mean walking 4 blocks with the teenager, potentially in front of even more witnesses. He was already uncomfortable with the number of neighbors who had come out to watch the encounter. Taking Tyler to his house would only create more opportunities for people to question his judgment. Several residents had indeed begun to gather on the sidewalk at a respectful distance, concerned about what they were witnessing. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived on Oak Street, recognized Tyler as the polite young man who always waved when he walked past her house. She pulled out her phone and began recording, worried about what she was seeing. "Is everything all right over there?" called out Mr. Henderson, Tyler's neighbor from 2 blocks away. "That boy lives in the neighborhood. I've seen him walking home from school plenty of times." Officer Martinez turned toward the growing crowd of onlookers, irritated by their interference. "This is police business. Please return to your homes and let me do my job." His tone was authoritative, but several neighbors didn't move. They were concerned about Tyler, who they recognized as a good kid from a nice family. Tyler felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment as he heard neighbors speaking up for him. It was good to know that people recognized him and could vouch for his presence in the neighborhood, but he was mortified that his first police encounter was happening in front of people who knew his family. "Can I please stand up now and call my parents?" Tyler asked again, his back aching from being bent over the car for several minutes. "You've searched me. You verified my identity, and now the neighbors are confirming that I live here. I just want to go home." Officer Martinez looked around at the watching neighbors, the flashing lights of his patrol car, and the teenager who had done nothing wrong but whose very presence had somehow triggered all of this drama. He should have ended the encounter 10 minutes ago, but now he felt backed into a corner. Admitting he had made a mistake would be professionally embarrassing, especially with so many witnesses around. Instead of letting Tyler go, Martinez made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He decided to double down on his authority and show everyone watching that he was in control of the situation. The atmosphere on Maple Street had become electric with tension. More neighbors had emerged from their homes, creating a small crowd of concerned onlookers who recognized Tyler and couldn't understand why he was being detained. Their presence only made Officer Martinez feel more defensive about his actions, and his frustration was reaching a boiling point. Tyler remained bent over the patrol car, his hands pressed against the hood, waiting for permission to stand up. His back ached and his legs were getting stiff from maintaining the uncomfortable position. The teenager kept thinking about his parents at home, probably wondering why he was taking so long to get back from practice. His mom had probably already set aside dinner for him, and his little sister was likely wondering where her big brother was. "Officer, please," Tyler said, his voice showing the strain of the prolonged encounter. "I've cooperated with everything you've asked. You've searched me, checked my ID, confirmed my address, and the neighbors are vouching for me. Can I please just go home now? My family is expecting me." Martinez heard the plea and felt a surge of anger. The kid was still talking, still questioning his authority, still acting like he had rights in this situation. In the officer's mind, Tyler's continued request to leave proved that he was trying to escape before something incriminating could be discovered. "I'll decide when you can go home," Martinez said through gritted teeth. "And right now I'm starting to think you're hiding something. Innocent people don't keep asking to leave during a police investigation." Tyler couldn't hide his confusion and growing fear. What investigation? I was just walking home from school. What exactly do you think I've done wrong? The question hung in the air because Officer Martinez couldn't give a good answer. Tyler hadn't committed any crime, violated any law, or even acted in a truly suspicious manner. The teenager had been polite, cooperative, and truthful throughout the entire encounter. But Martinez had invested too much time and energy in this stop to admit he had been wrong from the beginning. Mrs. Patterson, who had been recording from her front porch, called out again. "Officer, that young man lives here with his family. They're good people. Why don't you let him go home to his parents?" Her words were meant to help, but they had the opposite effect on Martinez. He felt like the entire neighborhood was ganging up against him, questioning his judgment and undermining his authority. The officer had always prided himself on being respected in the community, and having civilians second-guess his decisions in public was humiliating. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and let me handle this situation," Martinez called back, his voice showing his irritation. "This is official police business and your interference is not helpful." Tyler could hear the conversation happening behind him and felt even more embarrassed. These were his neighbors, people his family would have to face every day after this incident was over. He just wanted the whole thing to end so he could disappear into his house and pretend it had never happened. "Officer Martinez," Tyler said, reading the name tag he had glimpsed earlier. "I understand you're doing your job, but I really need to call my parents. They'll be worried sick if I don't come home soon, and they'll probably call the police themselves to report me missing." The mention of Tyler's parents potentially calling the police department struck Martinez as a threat. In his paranoid state of mind, he imagined supervisors asking questions about why he was detaining a teenager for such a long time without cause. The thought of having to explain his actions to his sergeant made him even more agitated. "Are you threatening me?" Martinez asked, spinning around to face Tyler directly. "Are you saying your parents are going to make trouble for me if I don't let you go?" Tyler was shocked by the interpretation of his words. "No, sir, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just saying my parents will be worried if I don't come home. That's what parents do when their kids are late." But Martinez was beyond reasoning at this point. The combination of his wounded pride, the watching neighbors, and his inability to justify the extended detention had pushed him past his breaking point. He saw Tyler's reasonable request as defiance, the neighbor's concern as interference, and his own situation as untenable. "Stand up and turn around," Martinez ordered harshly. "I'm tired of your attitude and I'm tired of your excuses." Tyler slowly pushed himself up from the hood of the car, his muscles stiff from being in the same position for so long. As he turned to face the officer, he could see the crowd of neighbors watching from various front yards and porches. Some were still recording with their phones, and Tyler wondered what they thought about what they were witnessing. "I don't have an attitude, officer," Tyler said quietly. "I've been respectful and cooperative this whole time. I just want to go home to my family." Those words, simple and reasonable as they were, seemed to trigger something explosive in Officer Martinez. The teenager's calm demeanor, his polite responses, and his continued insistence on going home felt like mockery to the officer. Martinez had been taught that criminals were supposed to be nervous, defensive, and eventually confess when confronted by police authority. Tyler's behavior didn't fit the pattern, which only convinced Martinez that the kid was more sophisticated and dangerous than he had initially thought. "You want to go home?" Martinez said, his voice rising. "You should have thought about that before you decided to walk around this neighborhood looking suspicious. You should have thought about that before you started questioning my authority and giving me attitude." Tyler felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized that Officer Martinez was losing control of himself. The teenager had been in enough tense situations playing basketball to recognize when someone was about to do something they would regret. He could see it in Martinez's eyes, in his clenched fists, in his aggressive posture. "Officer, I haven't given you any attitude," Tyler said carefully, trying to de-escalate the situation. "I've answered all your questions and followed all your instructions. I respect your authority, and I respect the law." But Martinez was no longer hearing Tyler's words clearly. The officer was caught in a spiral of anger and embarrassment that had been building since the moment his suspicions proved to be wrong. He felt humiliated in front of the neighbors, frustrated by Tyler's composure, and cornered by his own poor decisions. When Tyler took a small step backward, trying to create some space between himself and the increasingly agitated officer, Martinez interpreted the movement as an attempt to flee. In his distorted perception of the situation, the teenager was preparing to run away, which would make Martinez look even more foolish in front of all the witnesses. "Don't you dare try to run from me," Martinez shouted, reaching for his utility belt. His hand passed over his handcuffs, his radio, and his taser, before settling on the pepper spray canister. In that moment of explosive anger and poor judgment, Officer Martinez made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Tyler saw the officer reaching for something on his belt and raised his hands instinctively. "I'm not running anywhere," he said quickly. "I'm just standing here." But Martinez was beyond listening to reason. He pulled the pepper spray from his belt, flicked off the safety cap, and pointed it directly at Tyler's face from a distance of less than 3 feet. The neighbors who were watching gasped in shock, and someone screamed, "No!" from across the street. "This is what happens when you disrespect police officers," Martinez yelled, and he pressed the trigger. The pepper spray hit Tyler directly in the face like liquid fire. The chemical immediately began burning his eyes, nose, and throat with an intensity he had never experienced. He fell to his knees on the sidewalk, gasping for air and crying out in pain as the spray continued to burn deeper into his skin and respiratory system. "Help!" Tyler screamed through his tears, his hands clawing at his face instinctively, which only made the burning worse. "Someone please help me." His voice was already becoming hoarse as the pepper spray affected his throat and lungs. The neighbors who had been watching in concern were now witnessing something that shocked them to their core. Mrs. Patterson dropped her phone as she watched the teenager writhe in agony on the ground. Mr. Henderson started running toward the scene, shouting for someone to call 911. Other residents were already pulling out their phones, some calling for medical help while others continued recording the incident. Officer Martinez stood over Tyler with the pepper spray canister still in his hand, breathing heavily from his own adrenaline. The reality of what he had just done was starting to sink in, but he was still caught up in his anger and need to justify his actions. "That's what happens when you resist arrest and disrespect police officers," Martinez yelled at Tyler, who was still writhing on the ground. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before walking around where you don't belong." Tyler couldn't respond coherently. The pepper spray was affecting his ability to breathe properly, and every attempt to open his eyes resulted in renewed waves of burning pain. He had never experienced anything close to this level of physical agony, and he was starting to panic about whether the pain would ever stop. 3 blocks away, FBI Special Agent David Johnson was driving home from a late meeting at the federal building downtown. Agent Johnson had been working a complex financial fraud case that required him to stay at the office until almost 9 o'clock, reviewing evidence and preparing for interviews the next day. He was thinking about the case and looking forward to having dinner with his family when he turned onto Maple Street. The flashing red and blue lights immediately caught his attention. As a federal law enforcement officer with 15 years of experience, Agent Johnson automatically began assessing the situation as he approached. He could see a police car, a small crowd of neighbors, and what appeared to be someone on the ground near the patrol vehicle. Then he heard the voice calling for help, and his blood ran cold. Agent Johnson recognized his son's voice immediately, even though it sounded different due to the pepper spray's effects on Tyler's throat. The FBI agent's parental instincts kicked in before his professional training, and he accelerated toward the scene. Agent Johnson pulled his sedan to the curb and jumped out, leaving the engine running and the door open. As he got closer, he could see Tyler on his hands and knees, clearly in distress, with a police officer standing over him. The smell of pepper spray hung heavy in the air, and Agent Johnson immediately understood what had happened. "Tyler," Agent Johnson called out as he rushed toward his son. "What happened? Are you okay?" Officer Martinez turned toward the new voice and saw a well-dressed black man in his 40s approaching quickly. Martinez assumed this was just another concerned neighbor and moved to intercept him before he could interfere with the arrest. "Sir, you need to step back," Martinez ordered, holding up his hand. "This is a police matter, and this suspect was resisting arrest. I need you to return to your vehicle immediately." Agent Johnson ignored the officer's command and knelt down beside Tyler, who was still struggling with the effects of the pepper spray. The FBI agent had received training in pepper spray exposure and knew that his son needed immediate medical attention and help flushing the chemicals from his eyes and respiratory system. Tyler, It's Dad. I'm here now, Agent Johnson said in a calm, reassuring voice while pulling out his phone. We need to get some water to flush your eyes. Try to breathe slowly and keep your hands away from your face. Martinez was confused by this development and didn't immediately understand the relationship between the well-dressed man and the teenager he had just pepper sprayed. Sir, I told you to step back. This person is under arrest and you're interfering with police business. Agent Johnson looked up at Officer Martinez for the first time, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being in charge of serious situations. I'm Special Agent David Johnson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said, pulling out his credentials and badge. This is my 17-year-old son, and I want to know exactly why you just pepper sprayed a minor who was walking home from school. The color drained from Officer Martinez's face as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Not only had he attacked an innocent teenager, but that teenager's father was a federal law enforcement officer with the authority to make his life very difficult. Martinez's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to justify his actions to someone who would understand police procedures better than most civilians. Agent Johnson, Martinez said, his voice suddenly much less confident than it had been moments before. Your son was acting suspiciously in the neighborhood, and when I attempted to question him, he became belligerent and resistant. I had to use force to maintain control of the situation. Agent Johnson continued comforting Tyler while processing Martinez's explanation. His 15 years of federal law enforcement experience told him that something was very wrong with the officer's story. Tyler had been raised to be respectful during police encounters, and the idea of his son being belligerent and resistant didn't match what he knew about his child's character. Belligerent and resistant? Agent Johnson repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. My son has never been in trouble with the law. He's an honor student who was walking home from basketball practice. What exactly did he do that required you to pepper spray him? More neighbors were gathering around the scene, and Agent Johnson could hear them talking about what they had witnessed. Mrs. Patterson approached the FBI agent with her phone still recording. Agent Johnson, I live on Oak Street and I know Tyler, she said. I watched this whole thing happen. Your son was polite and cooperative the entire time. He never resisted anything. That officer pepper sprayed him for no reason. Other neighbors began speaking up, confirming Mrs. Patterson's account. Mr. Henderson, who had been running toward the scene when the pepper spray was deployed, told Agent Johnson that Tyler had been standing still with his hands visible when Officer Martinez attacked him. Agent Johnson helped Tyler to his feet, supporting his son's weight as the teenager continued to struggle with the effects of the chemical spray. We need to get you to a hospital to make sure you're okay, he said to Tyler before turning back to Martinez. Officer, I want to see your incident report and I want to know your supervisor's name and contact information, Agent Johnson said. I'm also going to need copies of any body camera footage from this encounter. Martinez realized that his situation was getting worse by the minute. He didn't have body camera footage because his department hadn't issued the cameras yet, and he knew that his incident report would have to explain why he pepper sprayed a teenager who turned out to be the son of an FBI agent. Agent Johnson, maybe we can work this out, Martinez said desperately. Your son is fine and no permanent damage was done. Sometimes these situations get out of hand, but we can handle this professionally between law enforcement officers. The suggestion that they could work this out privately made Agent Johnson even angrier. Martinez was essentially asking him to cover up an assault on his minor child, in exchange for professional courtesy. Officer Martinez, Agent Johnson said, reading the name tag on the uniform. There's nothing to work out. You pepper sprayed my 17-year-old son without justification while he was walking home from school. This isn't going away and it's not getting swept under the rug. Agent Johnson pulled out his own phone and began recording Officer Martinez, documenting everything about the scene for potential future legal proceedings. His FBI training had kicked in completely now, and he was methodically gathering evidence while still providing comfort to Tyler, who was slowly beginning to recover from the worst effects of the pepper spray. Officer Martinez, I want you to explain to me exactly what suspicious behavior my son exhibited that justified this level of force, Agent Johnson said, his voice carrying the tone of someone conducting an official interrogation. And I want you to be very specific about what actions he took that you interpreted as resistance. Martinez could feel sweat building on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He was facing a federal agent who clearly knew how to ask the right questions, and every answer he gave could potentially be used against him later. The watching neighbors weren't helping his confidence either, as several of them were shaking their heads and making comments about what they had witnessed. "Well, Agent Johnson, your son was walking through an upscale neighborhood at night, and he didn't appear to belong there," Martinez began, immediately realizing how terrible that sounded when spoken out loud to a federal investigator. "We've had some break-ins in the area recently, and young people carrying bags through residential areas late at night fit the profile." Agent Johnson's expression darkened as he processed the implications of Martinez's statement. "He didn't appear to belong there? Officer Martinez, what exactly about my son's appearance made you think he didn't belong in the neighborhood where he lives?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Martinez knew there was no good way to answer it. Any honest response would reveal the racial profiling that had initiated the entire encounter, while avoiding the question would make him look even more guilty of misconduct. "It wasn't about his appearance specifically," Martinez said, trying to backtrack. "It was his behavior. He was walking slowly and looking around like he was checking out houses. And when he saw my patrol car, he looked back over his shoulder, which is typical behavior for someone who's up to no good." Tyler, who was finally able to speak more clearly as the pepper spray effects began to subside, looked up at his father with tears still streaming from his irritated eyes. "Dad, I wasn't looking at houses. I was just walking home like I do every Tuesday and Thursday after practice. I looked back because I noticed the police car following me and it made me nervous." Agent Johnson nodded, understanding completely. "Son, that's a normal reaction. Anyone would be nervous about being followed by police." He turned back to Martinez with renewed intensity. "So your probable cause for this entire encounter was that a teenager looked over his shoulder when he noticed a police car following him?" Martinez was digging himself deeper into a hole with every explanation he offered. "Agent Johnson, there was more to it than that. When I tried to question him, he became argumentative and kept asking to call his parents. In my experience, innocent people don't immediately ask for lawyers or parents when police want to talk to them." "Officer Martinez, my son is a minor," Agent Johnson said, his voice rising slightly. "Under the law, he has every right to request that his parents be present during police questioning. The fact that he asked to call us shows that we raised him to know his rights, not that he's guilty of anything." Mrs. Patterson, who had been listening to the exchange, stepped forward again. "Agent Johnson, I recorded most of this encounter on my phone." Tyler was nothing but polite to this officer. He answered every question, showed his ID, let the officer search him, and never raised his voice or made any threatening moves. Other neighbors began confirming. Mrs. Patterson's account, Mr. Henderson, described how Tyler had remained calm and cooperative even when forced to bend over the patrol car for an extended search. Another neighbor mentioned that they had seen Tyler walking home from school many times and had never thought anything suspicious about his presence in the area. Agent Johnson was building a clear picture of what had really happened, and it was completely different from Martinez's version of events. His son had been racially profiled, detained without cause, searched without justification, and then assaulted with pepper spray when the officer realized he couldn't back up his initial suspicions. "Officer Martinez, let me make sure I understand your story," Agent Johnson said, his FBI interrogation skills on full display. "You saw a black teenager walking through a predominantly white neighborhood, assumed he didn't belong there, followed him in your patrol car, detained him without probable cause, searched him without finding any evidence of wrongdoing, and then pepper sprayed him when he continued to assert his right to call his parents?" When the encounter was summarized that clearly, even Martinez could see how indefensible his actions had been. He had let his biases and his ego drive him to attack a completely innocent kid, and now he was facing the consequences of those poor decisions. "Agent Johnson, it wasn't like that," Martinez said weakly. "The situation escalated quickly and I felt threatened. Your son was getting agitated and appeared to be preparing to flee the scene." Tyler looked up at his father with confusion. "Dad, I never threatened anyone and I wasn't trying to run away. I just kept asking to go home because Mom and Emma were expecting me for dinner. When he told me to put my hands on the car, I did it. When he searched me, I let him. I don't understand why he's saying I was threatening or trying to run." Agent Johnson's anger was reaching a boiling point, but his professional training helped him maintain control. He knew that losing his temper would only complicate the situation and potentially harm his son's case. Instead, he continued to methodically document everything and gather testimony from witnesses. "Officer Martinez, I want you to call your supervisor immediately," Agent Johnson ordered. "I want someone from your department here right now to take control of this scene and begin an internal investigation into your conduct." Martinez knew that calling his supervisor would essentially end his career, but he also realized that refusing would make things even worse. Agent Johnson clearly wasn't going to let this incident disappear, and the longer Martinez delayed, the more guilty he would appear. "Agent Johnson, maybe we should talk about this privately," Martinez suggested desperately. "Officer to officer, you understand how these situations can get out of hand sometimes. No one wants to make a big deal out of a misunderstanding." The suggestion that this was just a misunderstanding pushed Agent Johnson past his limit. His son had been assaulted by a police officer for the crime of walking home from school while black, and Martinez was trying to minimize it as a simple mistake. "Officer Martinez, this is not a misunderstanding," Agent Johnson said firmly. "This is a civil rights violation. You profiled my son based on his race, detained him without cause, and then assaulted him with pepper spray when he exercised his constitutional rights. There's nothing to discuss privately." Agent Johnson pulled out his work phone and began making calls to his FBI colleagues. As a federal agent specializing in civil rights violations, he knew exactly which procedures needed to be followed and which people needed to be notified when local police violated someone's constitutional rights. Martinez watched in growing panic as Agent Johnson spoke to what sounded like other federal investigators, providing details about the encounter and requesting that someone from the FBI's Civil Rights Division be assigned to investigate. This was exactly the scenario Martinez had been trying to avoid, and now it was happening in real time. Tyler, who was sitting on the curb with a bottle of water that one of the neighbors had brought him, looked up at the crowd of people who had gathered to support him. He was embarrassed by all the attention, but he was also grateful that so many people had witnessed what happened and were willing to speak up for him. "Dad, I just want to go home," Tyler said quietly. "Can we please just go home and deal with this tomorrow?" Agent Johnson knelt down beside his son and put a protective arm around him. "Son, we're going to go home very soon. But first, we need to make sure this gets reported properly so it doesn't happen to anyone else. What this officer did to you was wrong and it needs to have consequences." Within 30 minutes of Agent Johnson's phone calls, Maple Street had become the center of a major law enforcement response. 2 FBI agents arrived in unmarked vehicles, followed by a supervisor from the local police department and an ambulance to check on Tyler's condition. The quiet suburban neighborhood had never seen anything like the activity that was now unfolding on their normally peaceful street. Agent Sarah Chen, a civil rights investigator with the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services Division, took charge of the federal investigation. She had worked with Agent Johnson on several cases over the years and knew him to be a thorough and reliable colleague. When she arrived at the scene and saw Tyler still suffering from the effects of pepper spray, her professional demeanor hardened with resolve. "David, I need you to step back and let us handle this from here," Agent Chen said to Agent Johnson. "I know this is your son, but we need to maintain the integrity of the investigation. Can you take Tyler to get medical attention while we process the scene?" Agent Johnson understood the protocol, even though every parental instinct told him to stay and make sure justice was served immediately. He helped Tyler to his feet and guided him toward their car, while Agent Chen began interviewing Officer Martinez and the neighborhood witnesses. Tyler's condition was stable, but uncomfortable. The pepper spray had caused significant irritation to his eyes, nose, and throat, but the paramedics who examined him determined that he didn't require emergency hospitalization. They recommended that he see a doctor within the next day to ensure there were no complications from the chemical exposure. At the hospital emergency room, Tyler was treated by Dr. Patricia Williams, who documented his injuries and took photographs of the pepper spray residue still visible on his face and clothing. Dr. Williams had treated pepper spray victims before and was shocked to learn that Tyler was a minor who had been attacked while walking home from school. This level of chemical exposure is typically reserved for situations involving violent criminals who pose an immediate threat to officer safety, Dr. Williams explained to Agent Johnson. I can't understand why it would be used against a teenager who was simply walking down the street. While Tyler received medical treatment, Agent Chen was conducting a thorough investigation at the scene. She interviewed Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Henderson, and several other neighbors who had witnessed the encounter. Their accounts were remarkably consistent and painted a clear picture of excessive force being used against an innocent minor. Mrs. Patterson's cell phone video proved to be crucial evidence. The recording showed Tyler standing calmly with his hands visible, while Officer Martinez became increasingly agitated. The video captured the moment when Martinez drew his pepper spray and attacked Tyler without any apparent provocation or threat. This video clearly shows that the minor posed no threat to officer safety, Agent Chen noted in her initial report. The use of pepper spray appears to be completely unjustified based on the subject's behavior and compliance with officer commands. Agent Chen also discovered that Officer Martinez had been involved in several previous incidents that raised questions about his judgment and potential bias. Over the past 2 years, Martinez had received 4 formal complaints from civilians, 3 of which involved allegations of racial profiling. The complaints had been investigated by his own department and dismissed. But the pattern was troubling. Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, Martinez's supervisor, arrived at the scene looking extremely uncomfortable. He knew that having an FBI agent's son pepper sprayed by one of his officers was going to create massive problems for the entire department. Rodriguez had been hoping to handle the situation quietly, but Agent Chen's presence made it clear that this was now a federal matter. Agent Chen, I want to assure you that our department takes these allegations very seriously, Lieutenant Rodriguez said. We'll conduct a thorough internal investigation and take appropriate disciplinary action if any wrongdoing is found. Agent Chen looked at Rodriguez with the skeptical expression of someone who had heard similar promises many times before. Lieutenant, this isn't an allegation anymore. We have multiple witnesses, video evidence, and medical documentation of an assault on a minor. Your officer pepper sprayed a 17-year-old boy for walking home from school. The question isn't whether wrongdoing occurred, but what you're going to do about it. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Tyler was finally feeling well enough to give a detailed statement about what had happened. Agent Johnson sat with his son while Tyler described the entire encounter, from the moment he noticed the patrol car following him through the pepper spray attack. Dad, I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, Tyler said, his voice still hoarse from the chemical exposure. Maybe if I had been more polite, or if I hadn't asked to call you and Mom, this wouldn't have happened. Agent Johnson felt his heart break as he listened to his son blame himself for a situation that was completely beyond his control. Tyler, you did everything right. You were polite, you followed instructions, you showed your ID, and you asked for your parents like we taught you. What happened to you was not your fault. The FBI's investigation moved quickly over the next several days. Agent Chen reviewed Martinez's personnel file and discovered a pattern of complaints that should have resulted in additional training or disciplinary action years earlier. She also found that Martinez had never received adequate training in de-escalation techniques or cultural sensitivity. The video evidence from Mrs. Patterson's phone was enhanced by FBI technical specialists who were able to capture audio that clearly showed Tyler being cooperative and respectful throughout the encounter. The recording contradicted every aspect of Martinez's official report, which claimed that Tyler had been aggressive, non-compliant, and appeared ready to flee. Agent Chen also discovered that Officer Martinez had called in Tyler as a suspicious person before he had even made contact with the teenager. The dispatch records showed that Martinez had already decided Tyler didn't belong in the neighborhood, based solely on his appearance, proving that racial profiling had been the motivation for the initial stop. The local police department's internal investigation was completed within a week, primarily because the FBI's evidence made it impossible to dispute what had happened. Lieutenant Rodriguez was forced to recommend Martinez's termination and the filing of criminal charges for assault and violation of civil rights. The FBI's civil rights investigation expanded beyond just the Martinez incident to examine the entire police department's practices and training procedures. Agent Chen's team discovered that Martinez was not an isolated case, but rather part of a larger pattern of inadequate supervision and training that had allowed biased officers to operate without proper oversight. The Department of Justice became involved when Agent Chen's investigation revealed systemic problems within the local police force. Federal prosecutors began reviewing the case for potential civil rights charges, which carried much more serious penalties than the local assault charges Martinez was already facing. Tyler slowly recovered from his physical injuries, but the psychological impact of the attack was harder to heal. He found himself feeling anxious whenever he saw police cars, and he began taking different routes home from school to avoid the area where the incident had occurred. Agent Johnson arranged for Tyler to speak with a counselor who specialized in helping young people cope with trauma. The counselor explained that Tyler's reactions were completely normal responses to an unprovoked attack by someone in a position of authority. "Tyler, what happened to you was a betrayal of trust," the counselor explained. "Police officers are supposed to protect people, especially young people. When that relationship is violated, it's natural to feel anxious and unsafe." The story began receiving media attention when Mrs. Patterson shared her video on social media. The footage quickly went viral, generating millions of views and sparking nationwide discussions about police accountability and racial profiling. News crews began showing up in the neighborhood, and Tyler's family found themselves at the center of a national conversation about justice and civil rights. Agent Johnson was contacted by several civil rights organizations who wanted to support Tyler's case and use it to push for broader police reform. While he appreciated their interest, Agent Johnson was primarily focused on making sure his son received justice and that Officer Martinez faced appropriate consequences for his actions. The investigation's findings were clear and undeniable. Tyler had been profiled, detained, searched, and assaulted without justification by a police officer whose actions violated both department policy and federal civil rights law. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Martinez's police union declined to defend his actions publicly. 6 months after the incident on Maple Street, Officer Derek Martinez stood in federal court facing charges that would change the rest of his life. The FBI's investigation had been thorough and devastating, revealing not only his attack on Tyler, but also a pattern of misconduct that stretched back years. Federal prosecutors had charged him with deprivation of rights under color of law, a felony that carried a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. Martinez's defense attorney had tried to argue that the pepper spray use was justified, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Mrs. Patterson's video showed clearly that Tyler had posed no threat and had been complying with all commands when he was attacked. The testimony from multiple neighbors confirmed that Tyler had been respectful and cooperative throughout the encounter. The courtroom was packed with supporters of Tyler's family, including many of the neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, having become an unlikely advocate for police accountability since sharing her video. Her footage had been viewed over 50 million times and had sparked similar investigations in police departments across the country. Tyler, now 18 and preparing for college, sat with his parents as Martinez was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom as she explained her reasoning for the sentence. "Officer Martinez, you betrayed the public trust in the most fundamental way possible," Judge Rebecca Thompson said. "You attacked a minor who was walking home from school, and you did so based on racial bias and an abuse of your authority. This sentence reflects the seriousness of violating someone's civil rights while wearing a badge." Martinez was also ordered to pay restitution to Tyler for his medical expenses and counseling costs. More importantly for the community, he was permanently banned from working in law enforcement anywhere in the United States. His career as a police officer was over forever. The local police department had already undergone major reforms as a result of the FBI investigation. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had failed to address Martinez's previous complaints properly, was demoted and required to undergo additional training. The department implemented new policies requiring body cameras for all officers, mandatory de-escalation training, and an independent civilian oversight board. Chief of Police Sandra Mitchell, who had been appointed after the previous chief resigned in the wake of the scandal, addressed the community at a public meeting 6 months after Martinez's conviction. She acknowledged the department's failures and outlined the changes being made to prevent similar incidents. "The attack on Tyler Johnson should never have happened," Chief Mitchell said. "It represented failures at every level of our organization, from initial hiring and training to supervision and accountability. We are committed to rebuilding the trust that was broken and ensuring that every officer understands their obligation to protect and serve all members of our community. Tyler had used the months during the investigation and trial to become an advocate for police reform. He spoke at community meetings, testified before the city council, and worked with civil rights organizations to push for changes in police training and oversight. His experience had transformed him from a quiet high school student into a confident young activist. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone," Tyler said at a rally for police accountability. "But if my experience can help prevent other families from going through what we went through, then something good can come from something terrible." The incident had also strengthened Tyler's relationship with his father. Agent Johnson had always been proud of his son, but watching Tyler handle the aftermath of the attack with such maturity and grace had deepened his respect for the young man. The experience had also reinforced Agent Johnson's commitment to his work in civil rights enforcement. "Tyler taught me something important during this whole ordeal," Agent Johnson said during an interview with a national news program. "He showed me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing the right thing even when you are afraid." He was terrified that night, but he never stopped believing that justice would prevail. The financial settlement from the city was significant, but Tyler's family used the money to establish a scholarship fund for students who wanted to pursue careers in law enforcement or civil rights law. The Tyler Johnson Scholarship was designed to support young people who were committed to reforming the criminal justice system from within. Tyler's younger sister Emma, who was now in high school herself, had been deeply affected by watching her brother's ordeal. She decided to pursue a career in law with the goal of becoming a civil rights attorney. The attack on Tyler had shown her how important it was to have people willing to fight for justice when the system failed. "Tyler always protected me when we were little," Emma said. "Now I want to protect other people the way he protected me. I want to make sure families don't have to go through what we went through." Mrs. Patterson became an unexpected celebrity in the neighborhood and beyond. Her quick thinking in recording the incident had provided crucial evidence that made Martinez's conviction possible. She used her newfound platform to encourage other people to document police encounters and speak up when they witnessed injustice. "I'm just glad I had my phone with me that night," Mrs. Patterson said. "Tyler is like a grandson to me, and I couldn't stand by and watch him be treated that way. Everyone deserves to walk home safely in their own neighborhood." The neighborhood itself had been changed by the incident. The attack on Tyler had forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about racial bias and police accountability. Many families use the experience as an opportunity to have difficult conversations with their children about race, privilege, and justice. The Hendersons, who lived 2 blocks from Tyler's family, organized monthly community meetings to discuss police-community relations and ways to make the neighborhood more welcoming for all residents. These meetings brought together people of different races and backgrounds who might not have interacted otherwise. Tyler graduated from high school with a 3.9 GPA and received a full scholarship to study criminal justice at a prestigious university. He planned to follow in his father's footsteps by pursuing a career in federal law enforcement, but with a specific focus on civil rights and police accountability. "I want to be the kind of law enforcement officer who protects people like me," Tyler said during his high school graduation speech. "I want to make sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else's son or daughter." Agent Johnson continued his work with the FBI, but also began teaching courses on civil rights enforcement at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. He used Tyler's case as an example of how quickly routine encounters could escalate when officers allowed bias to influence their judgment. The reforms implemented in Tyler's hometown became a model for other police departments across the country. The combination of federal oversight, community involvement, and officer accountability created a framework that significantly reduced incidents of excessive force and racial profiling. 2 years after Martinez's conviction, Tyler returned to Maple Street for the first time since the night of the attack. He walked the same route he had taken home from basketball practice, but this time he was accompanied by his father and several neighbors who had supported him throughout his ordeal. The street looked the same, but Tyler felt different. He was no longer the scared teenager who had been pepper sprayed for walking home from school. He was a college student, an activist, and a young man who had turned his trauma into a force for positive change. "I'm not angry anymore," Tyler said as he stood on the spot where Martinez had attacked him. "I'm determined. determined to make sure this never happens to anyone else, and determined to be part of the solution. As the sun set over Maple Street, Tyler walked home with his family, surrounded by neighbors who had become lifelong allies in the fight for justice. The attack that had nearly broken him had instead made him stronger, and his strength had made his entire community better. The story of what happened that night continued to inspire people across the country who were working to reform the criminal justice system. Tyler's courage in the face of injustice, his family's pursuit of accountability, and his community's support for doing what was right had created a legacy that would endure long after the headlines faded. Most importantly, Tyler had kept his promise to turn his painful experience into something positive. Through his advocacy, his scholarship fund, and his future career in law enforcement, he ensured that Officer Martinez's attack would be remembered not as a victory for bias and brutality, but as a turning point in the ongoing fight for equal justice under the law.